we have had an NDP government. And I don't want to say they're bad people, because nobody gets elected trying to be a bad person. They're trying their hardest, I'm certain. The problem is we're getting really, really bad results. And here's what I mean by that. I just tell you some high-level information. In the last 7 years, they've taken our provincial debt, okay, from $50 billion to over $100 billion in 7 years. Now that's the debt. At the same time, the amount they're spending every year and the amount they're taking in, if you spend more than you take in, that's called a deficit. The deficit projected for this year is almost $8 billion. That would be the largest deficit in the history of the province of British Columbia. And they project more of those in the future. As a British Columbian, as a taxpayer, does anyone have kids or grandchildren? Raise your hand if you do. Okay. I do too. I've got 2 daughters. One's 14 and the other's 11. I'm very nervous and worried about their future here. Why? Because with all that debt and all that spending, we're seeing the worst results we've ever seen in healthcare, for example. 1 in 5 British Columbians do not have access to a family doctor. We are sending patients for basic radiation treatment down south to the United States instead of getting it right here in British Columbia. The only other time that's ever happened in British Columbia, you have to go all the way back to the 1990s. The last time the NDP were in power was the last time we were sending patients to get radiation treatment in the United States. Those are not good outcomes. Those are not good results. And if you have no access to a family doctor and you go to a walk-in clinic, which many of us have to do, you're facing the longest walk-in clinic wait times in all of Canada, right here in British Columbia. So that's not very good either. But even in education, and I've got 2 kids in the education system. My wife is a teacher, okay? Let's think about our education system. We're here in Surrey right now. The government promised, the NDP government in 2017, they said, we will eliminate all the portables in Surrey in 4 years. Okay, now I can tell you I would never make that kind of promise, because I know you can't keep it. It's impossible in a fast-growing community like Surrey. But here we are, almost 8 years later, and we've got double the amount of portables in Surrey. In fact, we have so many portables in Surrey that now the school board is saying we're going to have to stack them on top of each other because they're running out of room in the schoolyards. You know, they can't put them on the field because the kids have to have somewhere to play, or at least they can't put more on the field, I should say, because they're already on the fields. You can't get rid of all the parking lots because the teachers have to have somewhere to park. And so they're going to look at stacking the portables. That's not very good either. But even things like letter grades, you know, we have to return to letter grades. I don't even understand my kids' report cards anymore, okay? So I want to understand if my child is failing or not failing. And these new report cards don't make sense to many parents. But we also have to make sure that we restrict cell phone usage in schools. You know why? Because our kids need to be paying attention to the teacher, not their cell phones, okay? That's very, very important, because we know the evidence is showing us that children are too distracted. So that's why we're going to make big changes in education. But even our drug policy, on how we deal with addictions, the current government response is to give people free drugs. No, we say not free drugs, free treatment. Let's help people get better. I want to focus on helping people get better, not just helping them stay addicted to drugs by giving government-supplied free drugs. So these are the kind of things that we are going to be focused on as a government, to try and change things so that young people are saying, let's not move out of BC. They're going to say, let's stay in BC. How do we do that? How do we do that with housing, for example? Well, one of the biggest barriers to getting into housing is the cost, and also saving up down payments. So how are we going to help young people? Number one, we're saying, as a government, we're not going to charge first-time buyers the property transfer tax. Why are we charging people that have never owned a home before up to $18,000 for the privilege of getting into the housing market? That makes no sense. No more property transfer tax for first-time buyers. The second thing, though, we're going to help people save up their down payment. And the hardest thing to do is, how do you save up a down payment when you're already paying some of the highest rents in the country here in British Columbia? We have a plan for that. Our plan is called Rent to Own. And so we say to the developers of new housing, we want you to put aside some of that housing just for first-time buyers. And we want you to let those first-time buyers buy that unit off you, whether it's a townhouse or a condo. And part of the agreement is they get to live there for 3 years, and the financial close is not for 3 years out. So it's their unit, but they have an agreement to live there. They pay the same rent they were paying, market rent we call it, okay? So let's say the market rent is $3,000 a month. That's the average rent in Vancouver. If it's $3,000 a month, they're paying it still, say a young couple, $1,500 each, paying that rent. 100% of it goes towards their down payment. And at the end of 3 years, they've saved over $100,000 that automatically applies, and that's their down payment. That's how we will help first-time buyers get into housing, by helping deal with one of the biggest barriers, which is down payments. Now, all of these are great ideas, but what you need to know is this: politicians have a habit of making promises that they don't keep. Have you ever heard that before? They do. And so it's important that before you even believe a single thing I say, you have to ask yourself this question: what is his track record? What has he done before that they promised to do, and did they actually do it? The good news is, I can tell you we have a track record, because I first ran for office in 2001 when I was a very young man. Very young. And at that time, we promised a few important things to the public. We were called the BC Liberal Party then, not BC United, BC Liberal. And we said, because we had followed 10 years of NDP government, and we had lots of problems after 10 years of NDP government. So we said we were going to make a significant reduction in personal income taxes. We said that we would reduce unnecessary red tape, regulatory burden by 1/3 in our first 3 years. So those are the kind of rules the government brings in that makes it really hard. So let's say if you're a small restaurant, you're trying to survive, and government says, well, you know, you can't have a TV screen larger than 14 inches inside your restaurant. Government had all these kind of rules, believe me. Or they say people are not allowed to stand up with a glass of wine in their hand in your restaurant. You must order food, and that food can only come if they have a drink. Oh, there's all these rules, okay? Those are called red tape, we call it. Lots of red tape. So we said we'd eliminate 1/3 in 3 years. And then we said we would invest in infrastructure, like new bridges and roads, and SkyTrains and things like that. So how did we do? Our first day in the legislature, in 2001, we reduced personal income taxes across the board by 25%. 25%, you can check this. The lower two income brackets, it was actually higher. I think it was 27 or 28%. Now, a lot of people said, oh, how could they do that? That's terrible. There will be no money in government anymore. Well, actually, that's not true. It is temporarily for the year 1, then year 2. By year 3, we were collecting more personal income tax revenue at that lower rate than we were when it was the highest in Canada. Do you know why? Because we left more money in your pockets. And what happens when we leave more money in your pockets? Right, you spend it. You go buy a car, or you put your kids in that additional dance class, or you go out for a restaurant to dinner or whatever. People spend the money. And when they feel more confident because they have more money in their pockets, they spend lots of it. And then more people want to come here because they say, oh, that's a place where taxes aren't really high. They're actually pretty low. So more people come to BC because they like that too. Then we said we'd eliminate red tape by 1/3. That was my first job in government. Very first thing I had to do. And we did more than 1/3. We did 42%. I haven't got time to tell you all the things that we did, but it was good because it encouraged small businesses to invest and say, you know what? I like this. I feel confident about BC. They're trying to help me be a bigger business. That's the kind of things we want to do. And the third thing is investing in infrastructure. You know, our government built the new Surrey, well, it's not new anymore, but the Surrey Memorial Tower, you see there, the $500 million tower, that was a project that we said we would build. And we did, on schedule, on budget. Okay, that was a $500 million project. And I'm very proud of it because it was delivered on schedule, on budget. But we also said we'd build the Canada line, and we did, on schedule, on budget. We said we'd build the Evergreen line, and we built the Evergreen line. We said we'd build the Portman Bridge. We built the Portman Bridge. South Fraser Perimeter Road. Everyone knows that in Surrey? That was us. $1.5 billion. We got it built. Now I compare that to this government. They canceled our 10-lane Massey Bridge. Do you remember that?
Yes.
After $100 million had already been spent to make sure that that bridge gets built on schedule and on budget. The government canceled it. I haven't got time to go into all the details, but trust me when I tell you it was a very bad decision. The Patalo Bridge. This government said they were going to replace the 4-lane Patalo Bridge. When I heard that, I was very happy. I was in the private sector at the time. I said, oh good, that's one bridge I never got around to replacing. That's very exciting. Here's the problem. That bridge is 80 years old, and they're replacing that 4-lane bridge with a 4-lane bridge. That makes no sense. The population of Surrey, when that bridge was built 80 years ago, was 14,000 people. Today, when they replace that 4-lane bridge with a 4-lane bridge, the population of Surrey is over 600,000 people. And it's the fastest growing community in the province. We can't have a government that makes these kind of decisions. And that's why I'm excited that you're here today supporting a great candidate. Because I want you to know how important it is to have someone like Naomi in government. Why? Because she has experience in government. She worked for the federal government for 22 years. So she knows exactly how you shouldn't have government operate. Do you get the joke? Yeah. She's going to say, okay, that's a slow way of doing it. Now we're going to come and do it fast. I'm just kidding. But my point is, she's got lots of experience in the federal government, which is important. So she understands how bureaucracy works. And we need people like that in government too, because then she knows that the way you make bureaucracy work is you give them very clear direction and you hold people accountable for results. And then when you do that, I have seen bureaucracy work very, very well. But it requires leadership in government, the politicians, to provide clear direction, and then you'll get good outcomes. I promise you that. That's what we learned in government, because we were part of government and knew how to get things done. Today, helping support someone like Naomi is very, very important. But also electing other good people is important too, because without good people, I can't have good government. Michael Lee spent years as a lawyer in the private sector, and he got into government. When did you first get elected? In 2017. 2017.
Yeah.
Poor Michael.
3.5 weeks.
Yeah.
That's what
He only spent 3.5 weeks in government.
That's right.
You know, because the NDP got elected in 2017, sadly.
Yeah.
But you know, we need people like that have that experience in the private sector that they can transfer into government too, to help us get better outcomes and better decisions. And if we do that, we will make life better for all of us. But not just because we made promises, but because we delivered on the promises that we made. And that's my most important message for you here today. Trust the track record, trust the history of doing what we say we're going to do. And the final thing I'll say is this: it's not always easy. Many projects I was involved with were very controversial. Even the Canada line, lots of people said, oh, don't build it. This is the wrong technology. This is the wrong route. You know, you're going to disturb all these people. There's all kinds of reasons why people oppose things. And that's okay too, because people have the right to stand up and say, we don't like this idea or whatever. But you need to have people in government that also know how to say, you know, I've listened to everybody and I understand the concerns, and we've taken those concerns into account. But now we're going ahead and we're making the decision and we're getting on with getting it done. We owe it to the next generation to have that kind of leadership in British Columbia.